Dan and Derek, thank you both for your willingness to participate and just lend your expertise to this industry. I know for both of you, this wasn't necessarily your line where you dedicated your life to this, but in some way or another, you've been pulled in, and I've gotten to have a lot of overlap with both of you over the last year or so. And so this topic, I feel like, is not something that we talk about too much as far as webinars and conferences. It gets glided over for more programmatic or clinical topics, and sustainability is just not that aspect of serving survivors that gets the most air. However, I'd say it's really one of the most essential components in our line of work, right? We can have all of the right resources, all of the right people and training, but if we can't stay afloat as an organization, we'll fold. And future survivors won't be able to be served through the resources that we've developed. And some of those resources can just be phenomenal, but without the financial backing, no one's getting served through them. And so on this side of the field, unfortunately, I've seen this happen quite a bit, and it seems really to be happening more frequently, especially during COVID. We saw service providers that had no choice but to close their doors during COVID. But even now, it's continuing to happen. Now that COVID is wrapped up, at least our response to COVID is starting to wrap up. I'm still seeing the same sustainability issues. So before I get into just the real meaty questions, would you each just take one moment to introduce yourself and what your background in the field is? Derek, would you mind leading off there?
Happy to. And let me start, Alia, by saying just how grateful I am and humbled to be joining Safe House Project and all of the folks here. As I'm watching the chat go down, it's just incredible, the assembly of world changers that we've got on this call. If you take away nothing else, all of you who are joining, thank you for your work in this space. Like many of you, when I founded Sparrow Nonprofit Solutions 3 years ago, I looked at the nonprofit landscape and I said, if there was going to be one area that I wanted to get good at helping a nonprofit become better and maximize its world-changing impact, what would that cause be? And for me, it's human trafficking. I just see it as the trunk of the tree from which so many ills branch out. And if we can solve that root, that trunk, lots of other things in our world that are broken would be fixed. So over the last couple of years, I've been working with Safe House Project very closely, dear friends, Christy and Britt, and it's been amazing to see how this organization has grown in impact and influence. So that's a little bit of an intro for me. I'm a nonprofit coach with a focus on human trafficking.
Thanks, Derek.
Yeah. Cool. We are among good people. I look at the chat room and I think all of you are here because you committed yourself to something that's difficult and it's real and it's certainly worth it. My background is very unique in the fact that my first 20 years were in corporate America. And then through volunteering with my daughter in areas of anti-trafficking here in San Diego, I found myself at Point Loma Nazarene University. That's where I developed a lot of my expertise in fundraising as a major gift officer there. But you got to be careful about what you pray for when you want to make a difference. And a board came to me and said, we've got an organization that has an amazing program, but they need a businessman and they need somebody that can get their feet back on the ground financially. And so my wife and I talked about that and got a chance to work with Generate Hope here in San Diego. And that was phenomenal. We were able to grow that program, put them back on their feet, and they continue to do well today. I thought that was it. And then Refuge for Women contacted me like within a month or two and said, we're trying to do something in Southern California. So my experience is about 6-7 years within this space of launching residential shelters. It's not for the faint of heart, but boy, I'd be worthless going back to the corporate world because the impact you make on lives. And that's been the biggest joy. And if we can share anything today that helps you, then man, there's no shortage of need. And I think if we can all get there together. So Alia, thank you. And is it okay for me to say that Alia is a graduate of Refuge. In fact, I love Alia because she represents what we're trying to strive for. So Alia, great job. I'm a fan and high five.
I'm not gonna cry during webinars. That's fine. I'm close. Get it back together. But okay, Dan, you got me all flustered.
Sorry. I'm sure you'll pay me back.
Could you both just take a moment, take some of the heat off of me here, and take a moment to just explain what you believe we are in for financially in this industry in just the coming year or the coming couple of years? Dan, would you mind popping off there?
It is. There's challenges, right? And we just came through a very unique one called COVID. If you were experienced in the area of development, you thought you had a plan and everything shifted. If you're not experienced in development, then what a great time to start, because everything is moving. Derek's got some really good insights onto what the impact is across the industry. I want to encourage you and just say you can look at this challenge. It is a challenge. There are less donors, but I will say there are also donors are giving more. And then I think history will show that those people who have proactively built a development strategy do well. Those that have been winging it, or those that are event-based, or maybe just direct mail or direct social media based, those come and go. And so these are times to get real serious. I think when there's a challenge, you get two choices. One, you want to play defense, or you want to play offense. I tend to want to play offense, and which means be proactive. Do we pull back and hunker down, or do we invest in development? So we'll probably talk a lot about today. If you're going to invest, which is an action, then what is it you want to do so that you get the best return on investment? Derek, what you see some incredible, you've got a very broad base of look into the space. Share some of the ideas that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea as we start a webinar that's about future-proofing your nonprofit organization. And I think that's what we're all here to do, is think about, okay, apart from the actual operations of the thing, let's take a webinar and spend it on nonprofitology. And specifically, how do we become better nonprofitologists in this kind of current sort of future near-term landscape that we're about to walk into? And you ask 10 different people, you'll get 11 opinions on what's coming down the road, and they'll all be wrong. But from my point of view, as I look forward, as not only having led in the business world, but also in nonprofit leadership, what I see coming toward us is a time of stagflation. Stagflation. If you're not familiar with that term, what that means is three things being in play at a given time. Number one is economic stagnation. So a slowing of the economy. We might think of that in terms of a recession. There's formal definitions of what a recession is as far as how much the GDP has to drop and over what period of time. But for our purposes, it just really means that sort of the amount of money circulating in society just like ticks down a little bit. That's a recession. So economic stagnation is part one. Part two is high inflation. We're already seeing that. Show of hands of how many people it takes now $100 to fill up your gas tank. I'm in there. So it's everything is going up like crazy. So we've got that box checked for sure. And then high unemployment, maybe not for the reasons of the 70s, but coming out of COVID, this is like the great resignation, right? So we've got this high unemployment, maybe by choice, maybe not by choice, but it's this weird time of not as many people working as historically have. So you put those three together, and I think we're going into a time of stagflation. And what that means for nonprofits, if we look at the past in terms of trends, it's these things. And I'll try to rattle them off quickly because I know we have a lot of other things to cover. That is not doom and gloom. That's not going to be the total purpose, but we do need to have a real clear-eyed view of what we're facing. So what does that mean? First is that nonprofits who don't sell things will be particularly hard hit. So think about why that might be the case. When you sell something, you're inflation proof because your prices can go up too. So what's called in the nonprofit world, the eds and the meds, that's the education organization, and the medical, like the hospitals that are nonprofits. The eds and the meds are kind of inflation proof because their costs can go up. And how many have seen college go up even faster than inflation? Healthcare costs go up even faster. So they're fine because they're just increasing the cost of their services. What happens to those who don't sell things and can't raise their prices is the value of a contribution dollar gets more and more worthless, or loses in worth as you're getting that one contribution dollar. So a donor who has been giving you $100 a month, $25 a month, that contribution is worth less and less month over month because of inflation. So that's one thing, is if you don't sell something, which most I think joining the call don't, we're going to be a little bit more exposed. Number two, closure rates are actually highest, and this is good news, for international, public, societal benefit, religious, and mutual benefit or membership organizations. They're actually not that high. They're the lowest for human services and environmental organizations. So all of us are human services organizations, I think, joining the call. So closure rates are actually the lowest for ours. So as much as we fear closures going up, it's not as pronounced in this sector that we're in. Gladly. Number three, large nonprofits tend to do better in times like this that are coming than small nonprofits. So even though we're human services, most of us being small, medium-sized nonprofits, we're going to be a little bit less resilient. There's studies that have even shown that the Salvation Armies and March of Dimes and Easter Seals of the world do better during times of stagflation. And that comes at the cost of us small guys. But here's the silver lining to everything that I'm saying. At its worst measure, you look at the very worst studies you can see, the worst of the worst shows that the drop for the human services is 3.7% in terms of contributions in a time of stagflation or recession. 3.7%. What that tells me is the biggest enemy in stagflation is ourselves and our own mindset. Because if we're like looking at the economic headwinds and already having we're going to drop 50% kind of mentality, it's going to happen. Like you're going to wish that on yourself. I would say go in with the confidence that even now with what we're going to be facing with an economic downturn, the dip is just a little bit of a tweak down. And if you keep that view, keep the optimism, and Dan said, do the right thing with your development model, you're going to get through this, and it's not going to be as bad as you might make it out to be.
Thank you. Thank you, Derek. That's good news for all of us. It's the last thing we ever want to see a program close. And I'm sure that the whole industry after COVID and watching things happen is on guard and fearful in some ways, especially around this kind of a topic. So thank you for just putting some of those things at ease while still bringing us into the reality of what we're moving forward into. And so moving towards like solutions, what would you guys say are some of the key components for this kind of nonprofit in efforts to just maintain the resources that they already have? Derek, you want to tee us up again there?
Yeah, and I'll be more brief because I was long-winded than the last one, but yeah, I think it's really this idea of, for many organizations, to avoid closure, and I've worked through a lot of this with a lot of nonprofits, is you want to, if you've ever seen the movie Castaway, where he just needs that sail to puff up to get him over that last breaker out into the open ocean, that's what many nonprofits and many kind of here joining the call need, is that one puff of air to get them out of survival mode and into that sort of ability to thrive and flourish as a nonprofit in terms of development. And that puff comes when you combine two different things. It can't just be one or the other. And those two things are monthly donors of any amount. So having a critical mass of those $25 a month or more monthly donors that end up being your base, and that you end up trying to promote into being major donors, major volunteers over time. So having that core of 50 or more monthly donors held together with this other view of having major donors. You need both. You need the ones who are donating, probably for most of us, a major donor, $1,000 or more. Those $1,000 or more monthly major donors and monthly donors. Put those together and you've got a strong foundation that you're out of survival mode and out into the open ocean. Dan, let me turn it over to you and let you explain.
It's true. There's those two principles are retention and acquisition. And if you're an executive director or if you're in development or whatever your responsibility is, there's two things you just got to be in that mode all the time, which is retain the donors that you have and acquire a bigger base. And so there's tons of information on this. And I'm going to assume that a lot of people on this call, you can become an expert rather quickly. There's no shortage of technical information on, yes, it's a pyramid. Yes, your donor base is very wide at the bottom. Yes, it's very narrow at the top. But your point is excellent, Derek, which is you've got to have a strong base. Now, what your job is to do is to take this knowledge and start applying it to what is your need right now. For example, when I was a startup with Refuge for Women, our donor base was zero. So there was all about acquisition. And then I had to make that decision saying, do I want to build a base that will sustain me, or do I go after the major donors? Because it was Dan and a good board and a few people that cared. And so I made the choice to go after major donors. That was my skill set. I wanted to get a quick base, and we found that lead donor. What we're doing right now is we're going back and we're filling in the donor base of monthly donors and that broad. You've heard of the Pareto principle, which is the 80-20 rule, which is not really true in development. It's actually 90-10, which is 90% of your income will come from 10% of your donors. That should be a principle that drives you, not in value for people, but in understanding where you want to focus your investment and your intent. We should talk about retention, because once you get them, imagine, maybe I should throw out one more principle. This is the one I'll go long-winded on, because this is my most important thing, is that most nonprofits forget about the fact they focus on the nonprofit part when they're truly a nonprofit business. Imagine if a business had 6 customers walk out and never come back. That would be disastrous in business, yet the average retention in America for nonprofit donors is 40%. And that means 6% gave a gift, 60% gave a gift and didn't come back. And so that's where you need to really know your numbers and really be honest with yourself, saying, why is that? Because I was just working with a group here in San Diego that has, I go, your retention rate is 80% over 3 years. And they were asking for help, saying, we don't know what we're doing. I go, you absolutely know what you're doing. Tell me about how you steward your donors. Tell me about how you handle that first gift. And they were doing everything right. And their retention rates were 80%. And I was blown away. And I said, you don't need help. You need to just keep doing more of what you're doing. But that's a key thing. Keep in mind what retention means. And that's a whole webinar to itself. Are you getting back to your donors in 24 to 48 hours? Do you give them a call? We call every single donor. They don't always pick up. And then they get a little email or a text. But we're going to try and touch them within 24 to 48 hours and say, they just heard from me last month. Awesome. And why they gave to you again is because they heard from you. They love that. And then you can find out who they are and discover and ask them questions and find out why are they giving and do all those things. But it's your job is to retain and do that by good stewardship.
That's great, Dan. And I'll add to that, that call comes even with a pre-step before that of having a culture of sacredness around your donors. It's really hard to put words to, but Dan, you know it because you've seen it and you've built that culture within Refuge. But it's like this thing within a nonprofit where you speak about your donors in hushed tones and you get teary-eyed when you talk about it being all about them. And nothing that we do is possible without our donors. And just, you've got to really feel that all the way down into the bones as an organization and feel that way so that these calls are happening, so that these emails read the way they're supposed to. So it starts with kind of your mindset personally of if it's just, oh man, we would really use another major donor to pay all these bills. No, there's a reverence for the role that your donors play that drives all these phone calls, thank you notes, welcome packs. And that's where every organization that's on this call needs to begin.
Yeah, Ali, can we bounce around in this topic? Because this is the one, if it's fair, we should just be really honest with ourselves. We are doing great work. I'm looking at the names on this chat list, and that is the most incredible thing is to see a life changed. That is the most incredible thing. And these are areas that we want to get good at. And unfortunately, sometimes when you got a heart to go serve people, you forget about the fact that there's a lot you got to do that has nothing to do about serving the survivor. And in fact, you said hushed. It is, when you're in development, first of all, everybody's in development. If you're a program director, if you're a resident assistant, if you are a volunteer that's cleaning the yard, everybody's in development because it's all about relationships. And so we get a chance to connect somebody's passion in their heart. And our job is to connect it to this mission. And that is fun. It's not sales. You're scared to death to ask. But if you're really in a relationship, people will say, how can I help you? You can really screw it up. There's a couple of things you got to be careful of. You can really screw it up by treating donors like ATM. How do you like it when your kids come to you and say, hey, Dad, I need $20? I'm like, man, you've been in my house all week and you wouldn't even talk to me. Think about if that happens to your donors, you end up with 20% retention, 40% retention. And so there's just a lot of things to think about. I love the way you said that it's really about the donor. When we're talking to residents, it's really about the resident and her survivor needs. But when we're talking to donors, they're the hero. I used to, and this is a little, all of this is learned, by the way. You'll be bad at it before you get good at it. But I remember people say, oh, your staff is so amazing. What you're doing is so amazing. I'm like, yes, they are. And I'm so glad that program director, and I was getting all fired up about that, thinking it was good. And what I finally figured out is the donor's favorite subject is their impact. And the hero of the stories and the hero of your writing. And when you send your emails, It's all about the donor and their impact on the residents. We've got great program staffs to work with the residents, but our messaging has to really honor that relationship. And the reason that they will stick with you is because they feel honored. It's really simple. So many people say, man, you guys are the only ones that actually send me updates. You're the only ones that did more than just a transactional receipt. And there's lots of ways to do that. That's a different webinar, but those are principles that if you can really, really wrestle with those and just say, man, what is my donor experience? You'll do so much better right there. You don't even have to be great. You just have to be fully aware. I'm glad you brought that up, Derek, because the culture and the way you build that relationship is the foundation to all of the what to do's. So good. I'm glad we went a little bounced around in that one.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Do you have another, Derek, you want to respond to it? Or are you ready to move forward?
No, I think Dan's right on the money with the relationship building. And yeah, it's tough for a lot of folks new to development to hold these kind of the analytic piece and the relationship piece together at the same time. Do I have an Excel spreadsheet with a list of prospects that I'm going after and leaving kind of notes about the breadcrumbs and things that's in there? Yeah, you do. But is it also about the relationship? Yes, it is. So keeping those two thoughts simultaneously together, the analysis and the relationship, that's the name of the game of being in development.
Absolutely. It's funny to me because we have so many conversations on the other sides of the industry that aren't primarily development about how much of working with survivors is just really about relationship as well. And so that's something that I'm learning just about this industry at large, is that every piece of this is just about relationships and just about who we are as humans, is that's how we do things, is in relationship. And so I love that's something that carries from the first donor to the last survivor that somebody serves. Is just like a culture of building relationships in everything that we do, whether they be with organizations we have MOUs with, or with donors, or with clients.
Before we move on, even from this point, maybe just to rattle off a couple of really concrete, practical things or tools that Dan and I like. Dan, I guess what would be like if someone's really just trying to move out of Excel spreadsheet world into a donor development or donor management platform that you've seen work, that you like at Refuge? They're trying to up their game and take those notes, keep track of those relationships. What are some tools that are winners in your mind? And then I'll see if mine work align, and I might not even share my list if they don't.
Well, and I guess the first thing is, do you have a system? Because if your goal is to have a couple thousand donors, how in the world are you going to organize that? And so having a CRM, which it's salesy, but it's a system where you can put in those relationships, and then you can, so I'll put in Derek Timmerman, and then there's fields that go, how did I meet Derek? And I go, oh, he was a friend of Bob. And there's all these things that you can build this network in your head, but you got to get into a system. We should probably get an endorsement and a donation to Safe House Project for it, but I'm gonna pitch Bloomerang. Bloomerang is a CRM that I've been around for 6 years. The reason I loved it is because it was very cost effective. But what it does, it focuses on relationships. It was developed by a bunch of people in Indiana that are all in development, and they understand it's relational. There's other ones out there. That's been my favorite. But what it forces me to do is, it's nice for the automation. Somebody makes a gift on the website, goes right into the system. I can see all the donors. I can see the numbers. I can see the contact information. But what we have to do is treat it like a tool and say, I just made a call. Derek let me know this. I call it discovery. Everybody in your team is in discovery. You ought to teach this at your team meetings. Everybody's in discovery, which is, hey, I just found out Derek loves baseball. Dan loves baseball. There's a connection, because we're going to build a relationship about something, and pretty soon it can easily move into how's that transition from baseball to anti-sex trafficking? It happens all the time. You just have to find out, do I have anything in common with this person? With your board, who do they know? It's names, it's lists, it's building networks. Sometimes there's an ambassador program that is a real great tool to get out into small groups of 10, 15 in a home. The most important there is the host. That host, he or she, is already excited about your mission. And you get a chance to meet with them and do a real simple meeting with the goal of building your network, adding to your list. They take a little bit of time. We can certainly shoot out some paper on how to do those, but that's critical stuff.
Yeah.
Fundamental stuff. Let me say it that way. Those are fundamentals. And anything you can do to build those relationships and sustain them is the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dan. In a perfect world, right? Our focus doesn't have to be around, our focus wouldn't need to be around just maintaining those current resources. We would be growing, we would be becoming future proof. And hopefully most nonprofits are looking at growth and expansion, especially in this industry, to decrease barriers for the survivors they serve and create pathways for survivors in the area that for whatever reason have been unable to access their resources thus far. But obviously increased service provision requires increased financial services and financial resources. So how do you guys advise programs looking not just to maintain, right, but to actually continue to grow through this upcoming financial season? Derek?
I could jump in, and it was one of the earlier comments about, do you want to play offense or defense? I think you play offense. And I think I was speaking with a group that was really afraid of the future, and they were just scared about their numbers and the sustainability. And they go, man, we got to cut back. And I looked at them and my jaw dropped, because my thought was, you need to invest. And my thought was ROI, return on investment. And so I'll put it out there. If you don't have somebody that understands development on your team, you can go find somebody with good experience, and it can be very cost effective. Derek, would you agree 5 times return investment is pretty expected for a development professional, and it should grow to 10, which means if you paid somebody, just to get a round number, not that you should do this, but if you paid somebody $100,000 for them to bring in more than $500,000 that next year, you made 500% on that investment. And we sit around in our checking accounts and we squeeze our money, and we don't want to do anything for less than 1%. And so I think the business mind would say, can I find somebody that can help move the needle, and are they worth it? I don't think you just throw money at somebody. Find somebody with a heart and a passion for what you do. They're not a hired gun to raise money, but find the right combination, and then don't get cheap and not pay them. You want to keep them, and they will bring many times return to your team. And I think that's something that is a difficult financial question for a lot of small nonprofits, because we don't make much money at the beginning. We work our brains out at the beginning. I just want to see people thrive for the next 10 years. And sometimes those might be areas where you take it on like a business and you make the investment and have that investment pay off. Those are legit numbers. I would say a 5 times return on hiring somebody for development should be very expected. And that should certainly over time, in 3-4 years, grow to a times 10. And I think a lot of people forget that investment, and they go off hearts, and then they all get burned out. And that's just that's sad, because your hearts need protection, but that needs kind of money too.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree, Dan. That ratio is correct. Although I will say that the churn in the nonprofit world, in the development staff, is keeping that 5x from happening in most nonprofits. Is I think the average tenure of a development professional in a nonprofit is 18 months. And friends, that's not long enough to hit that 5x. So when you're thinking about making that investment, the onus is on you to hire well, because you're making a 2-year investment, someone who's going to stick around for 2 years and work up to that 5x. I did see in the chat, somebody asked about what that system was that you mentioned, Dan, so I'll just say it now. Bloomerang was it? BL Bloomerang. Mine's Humanitru is my favorite, and that's the one Safe House Project uses. It's great. Another good one that's a little smaller of an organization than Bloomerang, but it's up and coming and it's being discovered. So Humanitru and Bloomerang are the two. Yeah, I guess answering your original question, Alia, and even one of the chat questions was, how do I even grow major donors? Where do I even start with that? I'll just share my screen real quick, and hopefully you guys can see that. Yeah, so when we think about major donors, imagine for a moment that you're wanting to raise $1 million in your organization, okay? So when you're trying to do that, I think a common thing that you hear from those who are new to development is, gosh, if we only raised $1,000 from 1,000 people, we'd be there, we'd be at the million. And it's just not how it works. Is when you're trying to figure out how do we get major donors, it starts with a list like this, where you've got your major goal that you're working up to, which is $1 million. And then your top gift needs to be 15 to 20% of that total. So one gift here is 15% of that $1 million. And the way to read this is, we need 4 prospects We need to ask and build a relationship and ask for different humans in order to get that $150,000 gift. We need two $75,000 gifts and 8 prospects to get us to those yeses. 4 $40,000, 8 $20,000, 16, and you see it go on down the line to where, whoa, even though we are getting 40 gifts at $2,500, that only makes up 10% of the whole thing. So my recommendation to this group would be bring this chart to the board and have a 2-hour brainstorming session with the board members that actually put names to each of these prospects, 4, the 8, the 16, the 24. And maybe you'll still have Swiss cheese when you finish that meeting, but you'll at least have a decent start to having names against each of these that your board has worked with you to come up with. Even if you're just getting started, even if you have 0 major donors, as Dan can tell you with Refuge, there were friends in the wings that were the start to like how this would go. And maybe Dan, you could tell the story of how did you get that first major donor yourself?
Oh, and by the way, if you're an executive director out there, find a development director that chart fires them up. Because I see that chart and I'm like, oh, that's doable. And someone will go, where's that coming from? I don't know. But it's a number, it's doable, it's tangible. I would say this, when we say Refuge for Women, they've got a great, by the way, they've got a great 12, 14-year history. I was launching a new home in California. So that's why we were starting from 0. Just so that's clear for the Refuge for Women fans, it's solid and strong. I was pioneering out here. We started really with essentially a 0 donor base. We found the property. I thought, man, I'm going to do those ambassador meetings every week on our property. And when somebody walks on this property and they can look around and tangibly envision women who have dealt with exploitation they can't imagine, but they can see a healing home. I wanted to give them the emotional response that they thought this would be awesome. We'll do meetings every week. We'll knock this out. We'll open the home. We'll change women's lives. And then COVID hit and it freaked me out because the plan was so perfect. What we ended up doing for acquisition is that we started doing service days. We flipped the whole script because people didn't want to meet in a meeting and they definitely weren't going to go indoors. And I definitely didn't want to be on TV that night with one more group that, is violating a super spreader. And so what we did is we had a 2-acre property. So we started doing service days. And during that COVID period, we had about 300 people that came out that were starving to get outside, wanted to get out and sweat. And what we did, was me and a handful of people. We organized that so that we had people coming through, hearing the mission, getting their hands dirty, doing things like weeds, like building sheds, doing things, but they met us. And from that, I found all my board members, I found our attorneys, I found our major donors, I found volunteers. And the moral of that story was we just got started. We spread the net wide. But I tell you, I take pride when my phone cheers me for my 10,000 steps every day. I was getting 16,000 steps every morning with service days. So if you're out there and you go, gosh, I don't know all this development and stuff, get around the people. And then from that, then I could actually look, and Derek's chart fires me up because I'm like, I don't need 1 million people, but I do need to find people that want to be a part of this dream. Does that make sense? And so that was a practical way that we had to do it. You always need to be in acquisition mode. That's the principle. So find a great development director. If you're an executive director, listen to them because it's different. And the reason a lot of development directors take off is because they've got this great passion and then they end up butting heads with another leader. Figure it out together. And it can be an incredible team. Everybody on your team is discovery and can move people toward that type of solution. That was one example. It was during COVID, and there's no shortage of people that care. And there's no shortage of people that care about this mission, by the way. On those hard days, because they're hard, when you feel super lonely, just know that people care. They just don't know what to do.
And your example is incredible, and you're too modest to credit for the genius behind it and studies behind it. But I'll commend you that what you tapped into is something I want to underscore for everyone joining here, which is studies have shown that donors give more financially and volunteer more when they first volunteer before they give that first financial gift.
Yeah.
That's worth just pausing on and let that in, is that people give more financially if they first volunteer before they give that first financial gift. So if you can get that 300 or whatever portion is it means for your nonprofit, you could have cleanup days, you can have open houses, you can have, if you're doing something in Canva that's a design thing, someone who's a good writer, you just say, could you take 20 minutes and look over this? All of those are volunteer opportunities that when you first get them doing that micro volunteer thing, you've now given them the opportunity to put their fingerprints on this organization that makes them just psychologically so much more willing to give in every way, including financially. So if you're looking to start from scratch with major donors or monthly giving, what do we do first? Create these volunteer opportunities, even if they're micro, even if they're one-off, even if they just take 20 minutes. Those micro volunteer opportunities give you your initial prospective donor base.
Yeah. Imagine somebody coming out to see your mission, and you gave them the most incredible experience. They're going to go home and someone's going to say, hey, what'd you do Saturday? And they're going to go, you won't believe XYZ was amazing and people want it. They will become your ambassadors. And please don't think that development is about asking for money. You will, but you're really engaging people and people want to help. And if that's your assumption and you treat people well and you don't treat them like ATM machines, you really treat them like partners, they will stay with you. And it's exciting stuff. That's the fun part. If you can, that is the fun part of this, and to honor that relationship, because it is truly sacred. This isn't, we're not selling stuff. This is a sacred relationship, and you embrace that, you'll figure it out. And then certainly there's advice all around you. But yeah, I want to encourage you. I think everybody should get a really good taste of what it means to work in a development for a really worthy nonprofit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to get to thank you guys so much for all of that. I want to get to some of these questions because there's a couple in here that are super important. And one of them, okay, so I'll just go straight to Jennifer's question. So Jennifer asked, like, how do you manage the message to meet the donor's needs? What we were talking about, Dan, what you were specifically talking about before, their impact, the role they played as a hero, et cetera, without, on the other hand, disempowering the survivor in the message. Like this, she was saying that this seems to be a challenging line to straddle when you have a mixed audience, which we often do as a nonprofit. And Dan, I know that this is something that you've talked about before, and so would love to hear both of your thoughts. But starting with you, Dan.
So I can probably maybe answer what you should not do, what it doesn't mean. So honoring the donor doesn't mean putting them up on a pedestal. It doesn't mean stroking their ego. I think this space, especially this space. Now, some of the higher education, you go there and you got everything's tagged with a donor name from the toilet to the statue. This is really about the heart. And so by letting them know the impact you made on your survivor or the resident in your shelter or those that you serve, tie those two together, because your message should be about, I'll say she, just because that's the majority of it, but what she is experiencing under your mission's care, that is being empowered by the donor. And you connect those two. It gets me out of the way. It's not my face. It's not even my staff, but it connects the donor right to the mission. Now, the challenge here is this is a delicate space, right? There's a lot of privacy, a lot of confidentiality, a lot of sensitivity. And so that's a good line to walk. You figured out for you, I would bring in major donors to our home, and they needed to see what they were investing in. But I didn't want to have the residents, the women in the home, I did not want them to feel exploited at all. It wasn't show and tell. This is their home. And I also didn't want them to perform for me, because the biggest thing, and I'm just getting really transparent here, the scariest thing for me as a man working in this space was that all of a sudden I was bringing in the money. Oh, there's Dan. He's the man. He makes it rain. And I was so fearful of that bad dynamic that I got better at it, but I coached the donors so that when they came in, that they wouldn't ask those questions that they shouldn't be asking, that they really did not talk about me. And I think, gosh, this is such a deep subject. One thing I think we did was that we actually coached our residents on generosity and gratefulness from day one. And this was just the way we were showing gratefulness to our donors. We wanted them to know gratefulness. We didn't want them to feel like they were getting a handout. We wanted to feel like they deserved this, but we wanted it out of gratefulness. We wanted them to be givers of others because they've been taken. So much has been taken from them. We wanted them to know the power of giving and generosity, because that is what heals the soul. And so I think it wasn't just coaching the donors, but I think it was coaching them and then knowing that the residents' experience was recognizing what we were trying to do. I really took that down a path I wasn't thinking about, but it was such a deep, specific thing specifically for shelters that deal with trauma.
That's
And I
so
think
good,
it
Dan.
really
Yeah,
is,
go
I
ahead.
think it really is an individualized approach, right? Like that
Yeah.
approach, because I'm familiar with the refuge programs, that approach will work there. That wouldn't, having donors come through a home with minors or with a different security needs or whatever for the residents, or different levels of stabilization of residents, wouldn't be the same. And so just being mindful of that this, as far as that donor impact in that way, like it's not a one size fits all. And it really have to be focused, because always our priority is always on the survivors and the care that they need. But we as nonprofits, instead of government entities or whatever, like we are always towing that line of, we don't know where the funding is going to come from, and we want to be serving the residents. And so that's why we're doing this. And like I pulled Jennifer's question up here first, because I'm like, that's the problem. That's the question, right? That is the thing of like, how do we phrase things in a way that is, this woman did this incredible, powerful, hard, or man or child or whatever, did this incredible hard thing that is like counter the last 30 years of their life or the last 12 years of their life or whatever, that is totally opposite of that, and did this huge thing, and still put all of the power on her while telling our donors, but it's because of what you gave that she is then able to take those resources and run with it. And it's like that messaging can be really hard to grasp sometimes. And Derek, I know I popped in right when you were about to say something. So
no, that's incredible. It's all I wanted to share was something that hopes to build on kind of the amazing things that Dan, you shared, and you, Ali, as well, is when it comes to thinking about your nonprofit, you might think that the operational mission is the only service you're providing to the world, but I would actually argue that it's two. You're doing the work of your mission, but you're also helping those who support you weave their own individual tapestry of impact. When we talk about donor focus, that's what I like to talk with donors about, is the fact that they are weaving in their own lives a tapestry of impact that's made up a lot of different threads. Behind me, some of my threads. You've got my little guy right there, and I love English bulldogs. I rescued that one. I love hiking. My book is my love gift to the world, to try to give nonprofits something. I'm in Rotary as well. That's a Rotary plaque thing. So that's my tapestry of impact. And when you're talking with donors about theirs, that's what you're inviting them to. That's what you're inviting them to do, is you're serving them to help them weave that. Maybe one of those threads is through giving to your organization. If it's not, then hopefully you're the development professional that helps matchmake that with someone who is, right? It's, in the end, we're all one team. So that's what I mean by donor focus. It's not heroizing them above the survivor. It's serving them to weave a tapestry of impact that includes survivors.
Yeah, I would think, and as that translated, now I guess I went down a path of that was live, and I definitely don't think somebody needs to meet a resident to have an impact, but to see the environment, that's super important. I'm so glad you chimed in on that, Alex. So when it comes to writing, there's a resource that I would say you need to read between the lines. The guy's kind of crazy, but he's probably the best communications writer. His name's Tom Ahern, Ahern. I get his newsletter. A lot of it's crazy, but what it instilled in me, not crazy good, but he writes crazy, but he's one of the nation's prolific experts on communication. And he talked about it. It's 100% emotional. And there's certain rules that we break all the time. And he, it's like, how many times do you put the word you in your letter? You did this, you care about this. You can tell the story. You can tell the resident story, or the person that you're serving, tell their story and tell it in a way so that the donor is for that change. And so it doesn't honor the donor as a person, it honors their action. But Tom Ahern is a guy that I read a lot of his stuff, and he says, I forget the numbers, but it's like a 6-to-1 ratio. Do we talk about, we at Refuge are doing these awesome things, and here's what we did for these ladies. And it's we, me, you. The you is them. And so you can almost look at your letter and go, gosh, I talked about how great we are. It's true. Flip it around. Let the hero be the you that's empowering all of that, and let the other hero be the resident that is the one that is truly on a journey that is inspiring And so that's maybe the written piece that you could consider is, who's the hero? If it's you, then you missed it. If it's the survivor, or if it's the donor, then you're a lot closer, to making that emotional impact that you want to make with your donors.
Yeah. We'll keep this one really quick, but I did want to recognize Angela's question, and also just, and Dan, I know that you know this, but there are so many organizations that they don't have a development director. They have an ED that part of their job description is development. And so I'm sure she's referencing that kind of position. So as the ED, she's wondering how much of their time is donor management or should be donor management.
My experience was I saw what my contract was and it never came close, because when you're an executive director, you are carrying the load, and I feel for you, and we should go compare scars, because that's an amazing, awesome challenge. It can be done. The idea was I'd be doing 60% development, and I would say that didn't happen. And I would consider myself like Derek, that's our career choice. We got credentials in that because we chose it. Can I be really honest? Talk to your board about investment, because an executive director needs to focus, and there's so much to do. And I love the idea of an executive director and a development director connected at the hip and make the investment. And if that development director can't make that pay, you got the wrong one. And there's no reason, it's not a risky decision, but there's people out there that go crazy saying, I can take my business skill sets and apply it. Derek and I are both men. Holy schmoly, we're men working in an industry that is about women's shelters. That was confusing to people, and so many people found it inspiring. That was our give back. The world is out there. If you're an executive director that's feeling burned out, that's the first sign that you need help. And I just would rather be honest and say, talk to your board and say, let's make the investment, or go find somebody that did make the investment and find out how it worked for them.
Yeah. I'll double down on what you're saying, Dan, just to say that in my experience watching nonprofits grow, their first 4 hires at least are all operations folks. Yeah. And I'd love to see that script totally get flipped. Is if you're to the point where you've got that first major donor, you're leaning forward to get that development professional, because what's that going to do? If you do hire the person who's $70,000, $80,000 a year, but brings in $700,000, there's your staff. So why wait on the development investment? So in terms of sequence, find that major donor or 2 that gets you out of survival mode, hire that development professional, that right person, and then hire the operations staff to come in behind that. That the best time to build the ark is before the rain, and the rain's coming, friends. So if we want to sum up all of this in any way, is that we're on the edge, the cusp of a storm. So get that first major donor or 2, get that development person in place before the real teeth of this thing hits.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is with all intent. And that is with all intent that the most important thing is that your mission gets accomplished. The business side empowers the mission. There's groups out there that are working really hard to help small nonprofits, because the saddest thing in the world is to see somebody that started something out of their heart and have them crashed on a couch a year and a half later, exhausted and broke. And that's not necessary. This is America still. We can still take all those business principles and find somebody that can help you run it like a nonprofit business, but you'll have so much heart to make it run like it truly should. And that's really the wake-up call for most nonprofits. I really believe that.
Completely, Dan. And I'm seeing it in the chat. There's a question, find them where? Real quick thing, I know we're at time, is you can actually Google CFRE graduates. And every quarter, this certified fundraising executive designation, they every quarter publish the list of the names of graduates of those by state. So if you're looking in your state of who's recently got that certified fundraising executive credential, that's a ready-made list that's there for you to proactively go out and look for those folks to bring them in. Dan, I'm sure you have a piece of advice as well. How to find them.
You just need one.
Yeah.
You just need one key person, and it's worth the look. And I see that they're not easy to find in these days. It's just for anybody. Everybody's looking for employees right now, but there will be somebody out there with something on their heart. And if you get your name out there and you go out and meet enough people, they will become a donor, they'll become a volunteer, they will become a staff member. And it's just what you got to do. Make it fun. Make it a fun challenge. It's worthy. It's definitely worthy.
Yeah, absolutely. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks.